Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. It is Wellness Wednesday, and I'm super excited about today's topic. If you're just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom, a nana, a girlfriend, studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, a wellness advocate, jazzercise, running, line dancing junkie, and an online activewear boutique owner. But most importantly, I am a wellness advocate and have learned over time that wellness is an extremely broad umbrella. And when I started Wellness Wednesday, it was to begin sharing tips and tidbits from things that I have learned in my ongoing depression and anxiety journey. And I find that the reason that peer support works so well is because we often respond better to tips and tricks we get from people who have experienced or are experiencing what we are. I find also that in the process of doing this Wellness Wednesday, that I've learned many awesome things from you as the viewer on that I could implement into practice too, which is why I frequently ask for suggestions on topics, because I love to learn. And if it's something that I don't know very much about, I love to dig into it a little bit. A lot of times my videos are overviews, because if we dug into the nitty gritty of every single subject, we would be here for days, weeks, months. But in any case, I hope you enjoy. And if you've not watched before, please follow me, and set your notifications to all so that you get notified when I go live, which is every Wednesday morning at around 7:15. So I hope you enjoyed. If you do watch regularly, I hope you enjoyed last week's video on tone of voice. I had a little bit of fun with it, quoted the Joe Dirt movie, and I hope that you've been practicing the sentences that I gave you in different tones of voice to see how your tone of voice can change and affect how you say it. If you didn't see that video, I will drop the link in the comments so that you can go back and take a look at it. For this week, we're going to talk about a suggestion that I received from a viewer. So before I forget, let me just say I don't always see comments and questions while I'm live. Sometimes Facebook shows me the things, sometimes it does not. So if I see you, if you say, hey, I'm here, good morning, whatever, I will give you a shout out. If you don't hear my response to a question, or you don't hear me recognize you when you come on, then it's because I didn't see it, and I promise I will acknowledge you when I'm done. This is one of those cases where I only have so much control, which is ironic considering today's topic. So a suggestion that I received from a viewer, which I love getting because, I don't come up with all these topics strictly on my own, was about learned helplessness. I actually received a reel, and it was suggested that this could be a good topic for Wellness Wednesday. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, about what learned helplessness is and how we can break free from it. And if you're around my age or older, you may find another term that's linked to this interesting and something you've heard before that we don't talk a whole lot about nowadays. So maybe this is just a newer phrase for something that we knew was a phenomena to begin with. So in any case, I'm going to get started. This one might be a little bit long because of the subject matter. I usually try to keep it tight, but usually we run 30 to 45 minutes. So just know that if you can't watch the whole thing, you can go back to my page. It will be sitting here. I usually pin the week's video for about a week, so that it's easy to find on my page. And also you can always go to the videos tab and see all of my videos there, whether they were Wellness Wednesday related or not. But mine always have a Wellness Wednesday hashtag. So all right, so let's talk about learned helplessness and how we can break free from it. What is it? Is it a thing? And what does it mean? How can we stop? So learned helplessness, quite simply, the most simple definition, is feeling like no matter what you do, you can't change your circumstances, so you stop trying. And that's the key. It is a feeling of helplessness that causes you or results in not even trying anymore. So this appears most often in everyday challenges on what we would call a micro level. And I say we like I'm some kind of expert, which I'm not. but everyday life challenges on a micro level, like feeling stuck in a job, stuck in a relationship, a personal rut, struggling with weight loss. And just a few examples, this affects children too. It affects children and young adults. And more importantly, I found in my little bit of research that I did that oftentimes some of the research sites want to separate the two, when the fact is that the lists of things that are often attributed to learned helplessness in kids can happen in adults and vice versa. So I really think they're interchangeable and that they're essentially the same thing regardless of age. But there is an impact that age can have that we'll talk about in a minute. So examples of learned helplessness might be a child who has behavior problems or struggles with math, a teenager who's accused of lying all the time, even when they're not, so they start to, an adult who is constantly accused of being unfaithful when they're not. And let me just dig into these examples a little bit, just to try to give you a picture of what learned helplessness is. For example, if a child has, and I just remembered what I forgot to look up before I got on. So more on that later. But for example, if a child has a bad day at school, or a couple of bad days at school, even there's maybe something happening at home, something that's causing them to act out, and they're doing it at school. And so no matter what they do, suddenly they can't it seems like they're always getting in trouble after that. So an example of learned helplessness would be where they stop trying to do the right things and start continuously just doing the wrong things over and over again, because they have been negatively reinforced that this is what they are, who they are, and they start to believe that they are a bad child instead of believing they just had a bad day. A child who struggles with math, same thing. If they struggle with math and they're not getting the help, and so no matter how hard they try or how hard they perceive that they're trying, because again, if you're talking, fourth or fifth grade, they may be trying really hard. Nobody's raising a flag. Nobody's understanding. Maybe they need a little extra help. And they continuously get bad grades on math tests, etc. Then they may stop trying altogether. They may begin to feel like there's nothing they can do and that their grades are out of their control. An adult who is constantly accused of being unfaithful, even when they're not, may begin to have an attitude of just not caring. I'm going to be accused of it, so may as well do it. Like I talked about the lying, and then another example was in a previous relationship of mine, not the current one, just to clarify, because some of you know my boyfriend. In a previous relationship years ago, I frequently was made to feel, let me reframe that, because that's really not, that's more of a blame type thing. I frequently felt like I couldn't do anything right. If I cleaned something, that person often came and cleaned behind me, or got out of bed and did the cleaning first, utilizing the excuse that they wanted to let me sleep in. I rarely cooked because I made a huge mess when I cooked because I was very new at it. And rather than showing me tips and tricks, they frequently just took over the kitchen. So there were a lot of things that when this kind of thing happens repeatedly and you are repeatedly made to feel that whatever you're doing is not right or not good enough, you can develop an attitude of learned helplessness where you're just like, well, I can't do this right. I can't do that right. So I can't do anything right. So I'm not even going to try. So I stopped trying. I stopped bothering with cleaning the house. Because I just figured I couldn't do it right. So it was going to get redone, or it was going to get done for me before I could get to it. And over time, by the time I left this relationship, I felt like I couldn't do anything. So a person who was once, very motivated to essentially prove anybody wrong if they said I couldn't do something had become kind of a shell of that in terms of not feeling like she could do anything at all properly. And that was an example of learned helplessness that I personally experienced. It took me a very long time, and many trials of doing things over and over again, even if they weren't great, even if they weren't perfect, even if I failed, to get my confidence back to believe that I was capable of doing simple things like cleaning and cooking. So another way to look at that, and I admit, another example is somebody who struggles to lose weight. They keep trying, but for one reason or another, they keep failing. Maybe they gain instead of losing, or maybe they just can't get past a certain point. And it feels like no matter what they do, they cannot get past that plateau, or they cannot get the weight off. So they might stop trying. And good morning, Miss Kayla. I'm going to say your name right today. So essentially what happens is that this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now there's the old OG term, which means old school gangster. There's the old school term that some of us that are closer to my age or maybe older have heard in the past, that maybe even was frequently used, that doesn't maybe get used as much anymore, which is self-fulfilling prophecy. And there is a link between learned helplessness and self-fulfilling prophecy, because as you start learning to be helpless, if you will, then what happens is you start to believe that. And so it becomes a negative self-talk cycle. You haven't been successful at something in the past, relationships, weight loss, math. So you start to tell yourself you can't do it. And there's that magic word, can't. You start to tell yourself you can't do it. You start to believe you can't do it. And so you stop even trying. So other places where we might see learned helplessness on more of a macro level, and I'm going to be very careful with this because if you follow me regularly, you know I don't like to get caught up in politics or anything like this, but we can see it on a macro level. For example, people with type 2 diabetes who need the doctor to give them a pill to fix it and don't believe that they have any impact on it themselves. Because maybe they've tried before, or maybe they've just learned that the doctor fixes everything, or that somebody else is responsible for fixing their issues. Natural disasters, people that experience natural disasters repeatedly, hurricanes, tornadoes, sometimes have a learned helplessness where they just stop trying to even prepare because they're like, it's going to get me anyway. You know what I mean? And they don't feel like they have any control, or they don't believe that they have any control. When while you may not have control over a natural disaster, you can do different things to prepare that put you at a much greater risk of surviving, being safe, etc. And then another one is political issues. People increasingly seem to believe that their vote doesn't matter, so there's lower and lower turnouts at the polls. That's an example of learned helplessness and the apathy it creates on a macro level. Mental health issues. Excuse me. Allergies. The ragweed is blooming, y'all. Sorry. No, not in my house, but you get the idea. Mental health issues are a great example of this. If you are told, I have a chemical, I believe it's never been, officially stated, but I believe there's a chemical imbalance that runs in my family that goes back at least to my great-great-grandparent and possibly further. So I could have chosen to just assume and not try to do anything about my depression, my anxiety, my social anxiety, because it's hereditary and there was nothing I could do about it. And that is often something that is touted in today's culture, that it's hereditary and there's nothing you can do about it, or it's because this happened to you. And so the blame is put on outside external things, which it may very well belong on, but we also reach a point in an age where we can take responsibility to change that. But if it's pushed enough, if that external locus of control is pushed enough, then we may simply believe that there is nothing we can do other than take a medication. And if the medication doesn't work, then we need to try another one, or it just can't be fixed, when oftentimes there are so many things that we can do about it. So those are examples of a more macro level of this learned helplessness. And it's not just an adult problem. It affects kids and young adults in today's fast-paced, comparison-driven culture. And it often starts in the childhood. So while a lot of my research, as I said, tries to separate kids versus adults, many of these aspects are the same. Not only the things that cause, not only the symptoms, but the ways that we can possibly address it as well. Good morning, Danielle. What started this was the reel that I received from a friend of mine. Was a classroom where the class was kind of divided in half. I mean, you couldn't see that visibly, but what the kids didn't know is that half of them, it was anagrams, and anagrams are where you can take a word and turn it into another word. Half the class received a different set of anagrams than the first half of the class, but the kids didn't know that. They were just told to solve the first anagram. Half of the class got very, very, very simple ones. The other half of the class got very, very difficult ones that weren't even solvable. And then the last anagram on each of those was the same. But here's what happened. The side of the class that had the easy ones, and again, the kids didn't know they had different papers. They all assumed they had the same. The first half of the class that had the really simple ones were raising their hands within 30 seconds after being told to solve it. They were told to solve the first one, raise their hands when they were done. Meanwhile, the side of the class that had the really difficult or unsolvable ones, nobody was raising their hands, and everybody on one side was raising their hands, and these kids are looking around and they're like, I can't do this. I can't make anything out of this. Why is everybody getting done so quickly? It must be me, is essentially, you could see in their faces kind of the thought process. And put yourself in that situation. If you were a kid at one point in time, which you probably were, put yourself in that situation where you might be like, why can't I get this? And all these other kids are getting it. So then comes anagram number 2, which is even more difficult. And again, a good chunk of the class is getting it done and raising their hands right away, the ones with the easy ones. But then another set of the class, well, they're already feeling defeated because they couldn't get the first one and because they saw how fast everyone else could do theirs. And so they attempt the second one and they still can't do it. So now they're starting to sink down in their chairs. Some of them are raising their hands even though they don't have it done, just so that they don't look dumb. So you can see, and then everybody had the last one, which was the same last anagram, which was very simple. However, by that point, the ones that had the difficult ones or the unsolvable ones were convinced they couldn't do it. So by the time they got to the third one, they weren't even trying. And again, none of these kids knew that they had different ones. Everyone assumed they had the same. So this is a very layman's example of learned helplessness and how it can impact something so simple. So another example of this is kids who have everything done for them, kids who aren't given any responsibility, or maybe they're given a chore, but then the parent gets exasperated and does it for them, either because they don't feel like they're doing it right, or because there's an argument about it, or because it wasn't done when they wanted to. And so instead of holding the child accountable, the parents do it for them. This is another case where kids can learn apathy. Good morning, Eric. Where kids can learn apathy because everything's being done for them. And I think we see that a lot now as children start to age, where some are extremely responsible and they go after what they want, and others just don't feel like they can do anything without mom and dad or an older sibling doing it for them, even so much as to make a sandwich, because everything is done for them all the time. So they rely on, I don't know how, or I can't. There's that magic word again. And that's a form of learned helplessness that manifests in everyday activities. So I told you this is a little bit of a rabbit hole. So let's see if we can move this along a little faster. But you guys know I love to include personal stories and things that you can relate with to help these things stick a little bit and make them relatable for you. So the impact of learned helplessness can lead to, most primarily linked with depression, anxiety, low self-worth, and lack of fulfillment. Big shocker there. Not really. I'm being sarcastic because, as I've often said, it amazes me when I look into these things how much all of this really ties together and overlaps. It can have a physical impact. Make your own dang sandwich. That's exactly right, Kayla. Chronic helplessness can lead to physical symptoms such as stress-related illnesses and lack of motivation for self-care, which is exercise, diet, etc. As you know, both of which can lead to mental health conditions or exacerbate them if you already have them. Again, this happens with both adults and young people, kids. These feelings are increasingly common in teenagers and college adults, which is quite possibly due to the increased pressure they have to choose a career path early, and for insane academic performance. You know, when I was in school, I'm pretty smart. I think I'm pretty smart. I'm in grad school, currently carrying a 4.0. But the highest GPA you could achieve when I was in high school was a 4.0. We had time for extracurriculars. We were able to achieve that while doing other things and being well-rounded and having life experiences. Whereas now, these kids are under a lot of pressure to choose their career path by 8th grade. And to perform above a 4.0 and still do the other things like extracurricular activities, leadership things, and so on. It's a lot of pressure. So that probably is part of why this is increasingly common in teens and college students. Also because parents tend to more and more, we don't want our children to experience what we did growing up, whatever that looks like. So we want to give them everything we didn't have, especially if we came from low socioeconomic status or just a generation where we were required to take care of ourselves at a certain age. Some people call that Gen Xers. They don't say it's a good thing. They call us feral. I don't think that's the case. I think we learned responsibility and maturity a little earlier, maybe a little earlier than we should have, but it has changed how we operate today. But we also want to give our kids everything we didn't experience, so we tend to do and overdo for them. So recognizing that this is a problem and what it can look like is the first step to breaking free. So what are the causes and signs? And I have a little bit of a list here, but and so let's get us started. Again, remember I said that there seems to want to be a separation between kids and adults in this department. But I find this very interesting that for causes, for adults, childhood neglect and trauma, repeated exposure to chronic stress, abuse, negative reinforcement, natural disasters, repeated failure. Can you think of any of that stuff that kids don't experience? Because I can't. Kids are, especially at school, repeated exposure to stress. That could be bullying. That could be academic pressure. They may be getting abused at home. They may be getting a lot of negative reinforcement, especially if they've had negative, if they maybe started out the year with a little bit of bad behavior because they were acting out about something. Repeated failure. I'm pretty sure that can be an adult issue as well. So for adults, young adults, symptoms are listed as trauma, abuse, domestic violence, which for me falls under the umbrella of abuse, chronic stress, negative reinforcement. Is this all the same stuff we just heard about kids, right? Depression, anxiety, childhood neglect, natural disasters, and repeated failures. So I'm not sure why there's such a push to separate the impact on kids from adults, other than the fact that we as adults may be able to impact the kids in a more positive manner and keep this from happening. That's the biggest difference. We as parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, mentors, whatever, have the ability to possibly impact the young people and keep this from happening, rather than we as adults have to kind of figure it out for ourselves, find a counselor, learn to recognize the signs, etc. Kids are young enough that we can still help them. For us, we can still get help as adults, but we more often feel like we're on our own with this stuff and that we're the ones that have to make that change consciously. So, again, we talked about the early academic and career pressure for kids, fear of failure, and the increased mental health struggles. And then another thing I learned about was something called the 3 Ps that are attached to this learned helplessness, which is a pessimistic explanatory style. And I want you to listen to this and think about whether you or somebody you know sounds like this on a regular basis. The 3 Ps of a pessimistic explanatory style, which is a sign of learned helplessness, is a permanent thoughts like it will never change. It will never change. It has always been this way. Those are more permanent forms of thinking. Personal forms of thinking like it's my fault, and blaming everything on the inside, but not also simultaneously feeling capable of changing it. And then that pervasive thoughts like I can't do anything correctly, why bother? Those type of thoughts. So those are the 3 Ps of pessimistic explanatory style that tend to come from that learned helplessness, which is P for permanent. That's 1. P for personal, that's 2. And P for, I have balloons on my screen and I don't know why. This is very strange. And 3, pervasive. So those are the 3 P's that are often associated. So how can we change this? Well, for adults, I think I missed something. I missed symptoms. So real quick, let's go over the list of symptoms, because what I just talked about was, I lose my place in my notes sometimes and I get in a little rabbit hole. So we learned about what the causes of learned helplessness, which was trauma, abuse. And again, I have them listed over here, but this is a more comprehensive list. Hooray for balloons, Kayla. So learned helplessness symptoms. And again, a lot of these things you're going to hear, if you've watched me before, are going to be things we've talked about in relationship to many other aspects of wellness. And these can apply to kids and adults, no matter how much the research tries to separate the two. So those are hopelessness or powerlessness, passivity, lack of motivation, pessimism, avoidance or procrastination. Procrastination, that's a big one. Decision-making difficulties. These are all symptoms of depression and anxiety. Do you see the correlation here? Low self-esteem, anxiety or depression, headaches, fatigue, negative self-talk. You guys know that's my soapbox that I will get on all day long. Feeling overwhelmed and muscle tension. So there's even some of those physical symptoms. And these are symptoms that kids and young adults can experience just like we do. So again, the biggest reason I can see for the separation in the research between the two is that we all have the ability to change. We all have that neuroplasticity. We can change our habits. We can change our thinking. Good morning, Miss Peggy. However, kids need a little more help with that, especially if they're not at that age of accountability, that they're not at that age of understanding. I mean, let's face it, adults need help with it. What makes us think that kids don't? So again, how do we change it? And again, here is where they separated adults and kids. So I'm going to tell you what they said, and then I want you to tell me if you see anything that could overlap. For adults, they say to challenge negative thoughts, which we've talked about in previous Wellness Wednesdays, reframing the thoughts. Instead of, I got to go to work today, then it might look like, I get to go to work today and make a paycheck. Or I can't believe these people I have to deal with all day. Instead, I can't wait to see what kinds of things I learn from the different people I interact with today. So changing, I get to, we've talked about that before, helps to reframe those negative thoughts. Focusing on small achievable goals. If you're struggling to have motivation, you need to clean the house and the whole house is a disaster and you're like, I don't even know where to start. But if you start in one corner and work on it for 10 minutes and you accomplish it instead of focusing on the big overwhelming thing, then all of a sudden you're starting to feel a little bit better and you're like, okay, I can do this. What's next? So focusing on small achievable goals, taking action even when it feels uncomfortable. There's a theme here, getting out of your comfort zone and doing things that will get you to your goal, even if they feel scary. When I was experiencing strong social anxiety, most people didn't know it because most of it manifested before I got in front of people in the form of pacing and crying and convincing and negative self-talk, like I can't do this, what am I thinking? But once I got in front of people, anybody that was truly paying attention might see me shaking or might see my face turning very red. And that was part of that. But I would take action even when it was uncomfortable because the idea of failing at my job was even more uncomfortable. Seeking support. That's another way they suggest adults can change it. So here's what they suggest for kids. And it's funny how similar this is. Promote small wins. Isn't that the same as when I tell you to celebrate small baby steps, small things, even if you haven't reached the big goal yet, to make sure you take time to stop and celebrate? So for kids, it just looks a little bit different. Promote small wins, reframe failures. Well, we've talked about that many times, reframing failure as a learning opportunity instead of just, I'm no good, I suck, I can't do this. Using mentorship, that's the biggest difference. But adults, if we're seeking support from loved ones, from a counselor, from a life coach, from whatever, Isn't that the same thing as helping kids find mentors to help them through these issues? So you can see, again, they are very, very similar, and most of these apply to any age level. They really do. So I would ask you today, I would challenge you today, what is one small step that you or the child or young adult in your life took to overcome a situation where you felt stuck or helpless? And how can you turn that into something more? That's my challenge for you today, to see if you can come up with a time, and I'm sure that we all can, where you resonate and identify with what I'm talking about here today with this learned helplessness. So, and again, this applies to kids, and this can really apply on a global level, but it starts with us. It starts with us as adults, if we're experiencing this, to seek the help and make the changes. Because not only is that helping us, but it's helping others by setting an example. It's almost like that. If I can go to grad school, you can too. I have people that have reached out to me that have asked me what made me decide to go back to school, what made me choose the field I was in. They see my activity on Facebook. They see me talking about grad school, and it gets their wheels turning. Because they may have thought, oh, I'll never do that. Just like I did. I never saw myself going to college. I thought I was just working the 9 to 5 for the rest of my life, right? So if making that change and being that example doesn't just help you, it can oftentimes help people you don't even know are watching. You don't even know are watching. And that includes the young people that we're surrounded with, grandkids, kids, nieces, nephews, neighbors, John's kid down the street. Yeah, I'm just pulling names out of my ear, but you get the idea. So that's the biggest difference is kids, they're still learning to navigate. So trying to figure out how to solve a bigger problem that they're experiencing beyond just simple navigation is difficult. So if we can set an example, if we can find ways to help them or know how to recognize the signs that we just talked about, we may recognize them as signs of depression. We may recognize them as signs of anxiety. But again, oftentimes this learned helplessness is a piece of that whole puzzle. So I'm going to wrap it up now, but I hope you found this helpful. But I want you to remember, and again, the challenge, if you can think of one small step that you took or that a young adult or child in your life took to counter or overcome a situation where you or they felt stuck or helpless, and you're willing to share, you don't have to say names, drop it in the comments. Let's see what kinds of things we're talking about. Let's celebrate those wins. But I want you to remember these going forward. Focus on challenging negative thoughts, whether it's you or whether you're trying to help a younger person. Focus on challenging those negative thoughts. Self-talk, you guys know what I mean by that. Don't say anything to yourself. I don't know how many times I've done this. Don't say anything to yourself in the mirror or to yourself in your brain that you wouldn't say to the person that you love most. Anything to yourself or about yourself that you wouldn't say to the person you love most. So focus on challenging those negative thoughts, reframing failures. Take small steps forward. Baby steps. That's all it takes. Tiptoe if you must. That's a quote from somebody. Tiptoe if you must, but take the step. Because every step forward, even if you have a couple back, another favorite quote, it's not a failure, it's a cha-cha, it's a dance, you're dancing. Take those focus on those small achievable goals, take those tiny steps forward out of your comfort zone, dip your toe in somewhere if it's going to get you where you need to be. And seek support, whether it's to find a mentor for the child that can help with something like this, whether it's to find a life coach, a counselor, or just a really wise loved one that you can talk to. Support is important. Peer support is important. Learning from people that have been through it, maybe even if they're just one step ahead of you, it just proves you can take that step and make a difference. I want you to also remember that not trying leads to apathy. So keep trying. There are so many stories of so many celebrities, well-known, famous people who were successful, but not until they tried and failed like 8 billion times. Actors who became famous in their 40s because they couldn't get a job before that acting. You know what I mean? They couldn't even get looked at. And then I want you to remember again, we are all capable of change, and we are all capable of breaking free from learned helplessness, self-fulfilling prophecies, whatever you want to call it. We are all capable of that change, and it is possible for everyone, and especially for our younger generation, if we have the ability to do it, set the example, and then help them find the help they need to do the same. And maybe, just maybe, because I was once told that if you really want your vote to count, you vote on a local level, because that's where you can affect the most change. So if you subscribe to the theory that change starts at home, changing yourself, setting that example, and helping the young people that surround you to make that change and overcome those obstacles, that is where you can really affect the whole outlook on a macro level and a micro level. Okay, so I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please share it. You never know who you might be inspiring or who might find it helpful. You can always come back to this. You can save it on Facebook. You can send it to yourself by messenger. And if you have any questions, I'm going to drop the link. Good morning, Miss Ann. I'm finishing up, but I hope you'll go back to the beginning and watch. I'm going to drop the link for last week's video. I am also going to drop the link for the reel that my friend sent me that was what started this topic for today. And you know, I happen to know that a lot of my viewers let me know that they go back and they sometimes watch this 2 or 3 times, because I do cram a lot of information in a short amount of time. So it helps them to go back and re-listen. I certainly encourage you to do that if you find it helpful. And again, please share. And if you have a topic you'd like to see me cover, try to stay away from politics, try to stay away from religion outside of basic spirituality and faith. But if you have something you'd like me to check out, shoot me a message, drop it in the comments, whatever, and I'll take a look at it and work it into a future Wellness Wednesday. And next week is my 100th episode. 100 times I've been live on Facebook talking about wellness. So if you have a specific idea that you think would be a great way to celebrate the 100th episode, you let me know, and I'm going to be thinking about it too. Thank you so much. I hope you have a fabulous day, and most importantly, be well.